Most student writing suffers from one main flaw, but it's surprisingly easy to fix it. Once you know the trick, your writing is going to get so much better, and you can do this really quickly. In this video, I'm going to show you how, and we're going to get going with that right now. Okay, so for a start, I would be lying if I said I could show you how to be a great writer overnight. You can't do that. It takes a lifetime to learn how to be a really good writer. I'm not there yet, but I have been teaching at university for nearly 20 years, and I've seen simple ways to make students' writing so much better, and a lot of this stuff can be done really easily and quickly. Here I'm primarily talking about stuff like academic writing, essays, journalism, but also writing stuff like reports and data and writing emails and just stuff like that. Basically just where you're trying to communicate information in a simple way and be understood. I'm not talking about how to improve your fiction, how to improve your poetry or whatever. That's a whole different kettle of fish. Okay, so when I'm looking at bad student writing, bad essays, bad journalism, bad academic writing, bad most kind of writings, the kind of problems that come up are the writing is vague, the writing's imprecise, the writing's unclear, I can't follow it, the ideas aren't coming across clearly. These are all different ways of describing what's basically the same problem. Unclear writing. You're not clearly communicating your thoughts to the reader. Now, sometimes this comes about because, you don't have clear thoughts in the first place. But often when I talk to students who have written this stuff that I just can't follow, they can express their ideas clearly to me in person. It's not coming across on the paper. So they've got an idea, but it's not coming out clearly in the writing. Okay, so that's what we can help with. That's what we can fix, usually quite easily. So the number one solution in most cases for avoiding these kind of muddled writing problems is just to simplify your sentences. And often the easiest way to do that is we're just going to shorten those sentences. We're going to look at some writing you've done. We're going to find some long, muddled, confusing sentences and look at ways to shorten them. Okay, so this isn't going to solve all your writing problems, and yet it's probably true that you don't want every sentence you write to be really short. Otherwise, your writing sounds like this. But you don't want loads and loads of long, confusing sentences kind of running together. It's fine to have some long sentences as long as they themselves are clear. But basically, you want most of your sentences to clearly express one idea. And it's so much easier to do that if you just keep them short. Okay, so why does this idea of writing short sentences give you clearer writing? Well, first up, other things being equal, shorter sentences are easier for the reader to understand than long sentences. It just takes less effort to see what the writer is saying with a short sentence compared to a long sentence. But it's not just that. It also helps you as a writer in going through and checking your work, right? If you've got lots of really long sentences there, it's really hard to kind of go through and check and edit and say, have I done the good enough job in getting my ideas across clearly? If, on the other hand, you've written mostly short sentences, you're going to spot problems much more easily, right? Grammatical problems. In a short sentence, if you've got a grammatical problem with the construction of that sentence, it's just going to jump straight out at you. So you're going to do a much better job of checking your writing for grammar if you've got mostly short sentences there. But also other issues like kind of non sequiturs, sentences that don't follow properly from previous sentences, or the general flow of the way you've written a paragraph. It's much easier to check for that stuff and to edit it when you've got a succession of short, simple sentences. If you've got a bunch of short sentences and one of them just doesn't fit in that paragraph, it will jump out at you, and then you can either edit it or you can just take it out completely. If, on the other hand, you've got all these long, meandering sentences, it's much harder to address the flow of them, right? Because the problem isn't necessarily the way the sentences fit together. The problem might just be the sentences themselves. Okay, so this is all pretty abstract, so I just want to show you how I would go through two patches of writing that I think is pretty unclear, and I'm going to show you how I might change that to read a little bit more clearly. So these examples are examples that I have come up with myself, but they're based on stuff that I've read in student essays. So these are kind of like real life examples. Before we get to that, if you would like to support this channel and support me in bringing you this academic content, head over to my Ko-Fi page and have a look there at how you can help me out. Okay, so example number one, this is the kind of thing thing that I've seen in student essays on philosophy of mind. We're not going to worry about what the kind of philosophical content is here. We're just going to look at the language being used. Mary's knowledge on the question of colour is not incomplete prior to her release, and though she does have a new experience and gained some knowledge from it upon her release, this is not in the same category of knowledge as her knowledge about vision and colour. So we've got one great big long sentence there. It was really hard to read out. It's not really clear where we've got a new idea or it's the same idea being talked about. So let's just break that down into simpler sentences. The first idea is really here. Mary's knowledge on the question of colour is not incomplete prior to her release. Okay, so let's just make that one sentence. Then we've got this great big long thing here. Though she does one thing, blah, 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 comma, this is not. Okay, so we could break that up by saying she does have a new experience and gains some knowledge from it upon her release. However, this is not in the same category of knowledge as her knowledge about vision and colour. Oh yeah, full stop there. Okay, so now we've got 3 sentences rather than 1. Each one's pretty short. I think each one's easy to understand. I think we can still do a lot better here by removing some of the words, so by making each sentence shorter in and of itself. So what we've got here is we've got she gains some knowledge, and here we've got knowledge, and here we've got knowledge. So a way to improve on that would be just stop saying knowledge. So I think the best way to do that is just to get rid of this of knowledge here. Okay, so however, this is not in the same category as her knowledge about vision and colour. Okay, so we've got to make it clear that we're talking here about a category of knowledge. So let's look at this previous sentence. She does have a new experience and gains some knowledge from it upon her release. Really all we're saying in that sentence is that she gains some knowledge upon her release. So we could say she does gain some knowledge upon her release. However, this, okay, so there it's clear that this means knowledge. She does gain some knowledge upon her release. However, this is not in the same category as her knowledge about vision and colour. Okay, so that second sentence now is really short. We're not going to improve on that. This third one, I think is pretty good. However, this is not in the same category as her knowledge about vision and colour. I think we could improve this first sentence somewhat, just by the way it's phrased. Mary's knowledge on the question of colour. I mean, that basically means Mary's knowledge about colour, doesn't it? So Mary's knowledge about colour is not incomplete. Okay, well that's a double negative, so that could just be is complete. Okay, so here I think is a pretty good revision of that really nasty long sentence that we started with. Mary's knowledge about colour is complete prior to her release. She does gain some knowledge upon her release. However, this is not in the same category as her knowledge about vision and colour. Yeah, one improvement on reading it again. So we've got here her release and a repetition, her release. I don't think we just want to delete that by saying she does gain some knowledge, because we're not being clear about when she gains the knowledge. So what we could do is just change the phrasing. When released. Okay, so that's one way we could do it. Mary's knowledge about colour is complete prior to her release. Full stop. She does gain some knowledge when released. Full stop. However, this is not in the same category as her knowledge about vision and colour. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, let's move on to our second example. Okay, so here we've got one paragraph and it's pretty much 2 sentences. Opponents of this particular argument would agree with each other that there is no empirical evidence to support the premise, and therefore the claims that mental states are irreducible to physical states would be baseless. Now, not only would they challenge dualists by claiming that these emotions could be understood through physical investigation of the brain, but furthermore, they would argue that people would still be unable to have their subjective thoughts, but this does not mean that nobody else can understand them or recognise them. Okay, so I was having real trouble reading that, and as I was reading it, I basically couldn't remember what it was about as I went from one bit to another. The whole thing is basically 2 sentences, but there's lots of different ideas there, so we really need to break the writing down into 1 sentence per idea. So obvious markers here of where we need to break the sentences apart are conjunctions like therefore. So the first thing we could do is we could just break it down into shorter sentences on that basis. Okay, so there and there and there. So we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences instead of just two. Let's go and work on each of those individual sentences. Okay. First one. Opponents of this particular argument would agree with each other. Well, I mean, that's basically just saying, here's what opponents say. So we could say opponents of this particular argument. Well, presumably we know we're talking about the particular argument. That's something that would have been said in the previous paragraph or sentence. So how about we just say opponents would say that there is no empirical evidence to support the premise? Or how about this? Opponents object that there is no empirical evidence to support the premise. Okay, with this second sentence, I'm not really sure how to improve it. It just feels really awkward. So what I'm wondering is whether this bit in the first sentence, the premise, is the same as the claim that mental states are irreducible to physical states. We want to say that that is baseless because no evidence supports that thing. If that's what the author is trying to say, what we could say is there is no empirical evidence that mental states are irreducible to physical states. Okay, so there I did a different thing. I didn't break one long sentence into two shorter ones. I took two sentences that I didn't really think worked and I put them together by kind of taking out information that we just didn't need. Okay, so now let's look at this second sentence. Now, not only would they challenge dualists by claiming that these emotions could be understood through physical investigation of the brain. Okay, that didn't make much sense on its own. It's meant to flow into this sentence here. So I think the problem here is we're running together a bunch of different ideas. It's about a challenge to dualists, but also the claim that emotions could be understood through physical investigation of the brain. You know, we could just say these emotions could be understood through physical investigation of the brain, say the opponents. Okay, and then flowing into the next sentence, they would argue, well, let's just get rid of that because we've just said, say the opponents, so people would still be able to have their subjective thoughts. Okay, well, that's a nice short sentence, but this does not mean that nobody else can understand them or recognize them. Okay, so we've got a kind of double negative there. This does not mean that nobody, but we don't want to just get rid of that because I think that might change the meaning if we just said that people can understand and recognize them. As it stands, we're talking about this not really following from this. Okay, and we want to preserve that lack of logical entailment from one to the other. So how can we do that? How about this? But it doesn't follow that we can't understand or recognize them. Now that we've done it like that, I think maybe we could put that back into one sentence. This sentence, it's maybe a bit on the long side, but it reads quite well. Oh, I think that should be able there. People would still be able to have their subjective thoughts, but it doesn't follow that we can't understand or recognize them. Okay, so what we've got there, I think it's a big improvement on what we started with. Maybe we could get rid of these here. We're talking about emotions in general. Emotions could be understood through physical investigation of the brain, say the opponents. People would still be able to have their subjective thoughts, but it doesn't follow that we can't understand or recognize them. Okay, so I'm not totally happy with that paragraph because I think it jumps around different topics, you know, mental states, emotions, subjective thoughts. It's not really clear how those things fit together. I don't think we can fix that without completely hitting delete and just writing the whole thing again. But I do think if these are the ideas that you wanted to convey, we've now got a paragraph that conveys those ideas so much better than what we started with. So there is obviously loads more to say about the art of good writing, particularly about essay writing. If you want more tips on how to write good essays, how to improve your essays, go and take a look at this video over here. Thank you so much to all my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible. Thanks to you guys for watching this far. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys back here soon.